Wowie kazowie, guys, it's been a long time, and this is actually one of the colors I was the most excited to get to. So hey everybody, Kudo-kun here. If you don't know what's going on, what we're going to do is look at some relevant cards from the MLP card game to help you either get into pink if you haven't already, or if you already have pink in your deck, this should help you get some ideas on how to make it stronger and more competitive for today's metagame. Couple of disclaimers, I don't play in high-level tournaments or events, so some of the metagame might counteract some of the things that I have to say here in this video, but if you happen to go to high-level tournaments or if you happen to play on a regular basis and you have some input for me, please leave it in the comments section below. The more information we can get out there, the better. Also, keep in mind, I'm pretty limited on the cards I'm going to look at. We're going to look at 5 mains, 10 friends, 10 resources, and 10 events. So if a card that you like isn't on my list, then feel free to talk about it in the comments section below. Let's not waste too much time and jump straight into the mains. The first main we're going to look at is Pinkie Pie Pokey Pony, and this card sort of exemplifies one of the more interesting things about the color to me. First, let's see what it does. It flips when you end your turn with this at a problem or at home with at least 3 of your other friends. Pretty simple flip condition, but you probably won't pull it off at the beginning of the game. It's sort of a mid-game effect, which isn't too bad because its flip side makes sense. First of all, it has random, decent effect, I guess. I mean, it's not as useful now because nobody really uses cards with 1 power anymore. But its other effect is when you confront this card's problem, you can dismiss one of your friends there to dismiss an opponent's friend there. So you sacrifice one of your friends and get rid of one of your opponent's friends. One thing about pink is it has some of the best on-play effects in the game. And instead of doing the purple thing where they teleport in and out, back and forth to keep getting their on-play effects, they just kind of kill them off after they're done. You play a card, you get its on-play effect, and then you play another card to sacrifice that card to get even more effects off of it. It's pretty cutthroat. It's kind of like playing black in Magic, but I'm kind of getting off topic. This card's really good for pure dismissal decks, and really any deck that has a lot of on-play effects where you don't have much to do with your friends after you've already played them and gotten their effects off. If you run something like this, and then you play something like Pinkie Responsibility Pie or Rockington, then you play them, you dismiss a friend, then you sacrifice them off and dismiss another friend to get 2 sacrifices. It's obviously pretty awesome. The next Pinkie Pie we're going to be looking at is Ambassador of Laughter. At the start of your turn, if you have more friends than your opponent, turn this card over. This is really awesome because right now you can see a lot of control decks sort of taking the meta, and with something like this, you can pretty much take 1 step ahead of your opponent in every way. Control decks can't play the first turn, so if you're running a deck that can play the first turn, and you play the first turn, your opponent can't do anything about it unless they're running some kind of really weird control deck or some kind of purple deck that happens to have, like, Bulb in their hand or something. In most cases, though, this should be a pretty easy flip condition. It also has Eccentric, which kicks the crap out of random, because it makes it so your opponent has to have more power at problems, which is great for us because we get rid of ponies that are at problems. The higher the requirements for the problem, the more characters your opponent has to play there in order to solve them, the more targets we have for our effects. Its other effect is you can pay 1 less to a minimum of 1 to play your first friend to this card's problem each turn. Pink friends are pretty expensive, so if you're only playing 1 friend a turn, this is pretty much like the most ideal situation for you to be in. Every single turn you're saving 1 action point, and that really adds up. I want to look at Discord bending the rules next. Now, some players are going to look at this and go, oh my gosh, that's broken, he starts out at 3 power, and some other players are going to go, wait a second, this card's really bad. Here's the thing with Discord bending the rules. He's not something that you would put in a conventional deck. He's something you absolutely have to build around, and he's for very cheesy, one-minded decks. Starting out at 3 power means you can meet color requirements almost immediately. If you're doing a deck with multiple colors, and you have the color fixing cards, then you can play one of the pink ones and turn this into a 5 power that has 5 power in 2 different colors. At the start of each of your turns, you can look the top card of any problem deck, which is okay. It lets you know it's coming up. It's really not going to be anything that changes the game for you, I'd say. And at the end of each of your opponent's turns, if that opponent played at least 2 cards that turn, you flip this card over and it becomes its one side, which is obviously really bad. Although, while it's at its one side, if you play a card and you played at least 2 cards that turn, you turn this card back over to its 3 side. So, this card isn't necessarily as bad as people say it is. It's 3 power during your opponent's turn the whole turn, no matter what. Even if your opponent meets its flip condition, and you end up having to turn it back over to its boosted side, it doesn't happen till the end of your opponent's turn. So at the end of your opponent's turn, after any face-offs or anything have occurred, you flip it to its one side, and then during your turn you can flip it back over to its start side by playing a card when you've played at least 2 cards. A neato card for gimmicky decks. So I don't know who this Lyra person is, but Lyra gets a lot of really rare, really powerful cards. Her main character card is Handy. During your main phase, you can pay 2 and discard a card from your hand to turn this card over. So you can do this anytime. Like, you could literally do this during the first turn if you wanted to, though you're not going to want to. When it gets to its flipped side, you draw cards until you have maximum hand size. Holy cow, that is amazing. This is mainly amazing if you're running some kind of really low-cost, rushy sort of deck, like if you're running like a pink-yellow or something where you can play out a hand very quickly. You play out your hands. You pay 2, you discard a card from your hand, and then you just draw until you have maximum hand size, and you can potentially draw a lot of cards off of this. Or you could just say screw all of that and have it immediately become 3 power, and that's really good too. Just everything about this card is amazing. Some people can also point out that this card is technically abusable because there are ways in the game now to flip a card over when it's on its boosted side. So you boost this, you draw until you have maximum cards in your hand, then you flip it back to its start side, and you reboost it, and you can just get maximum hand size over again. A pretty good overall ultra rare. Unfortunately for Lyra, as good as she is, I saved the best for last. DJ Pawn 3 has her sort of beat in her own area. While I do see that Lyra does get you a lot of cards potentially quickly, I would argue that DJ Pawn 3 is better, and what's cool is she comes in a starter deck. So her effect is when you draw your 3rd card for a turn, shuffle your deck and turn this card over. I want you to keep in mind for a second that you draw 1 card at the beginning of your turn, and that does count towards this effect. And if you pay 2 action points, you draw 2 more cards. So it's the same cost as Lyra's, but you don't have to discard a card from your hand in order to do it. And again, this is one you could do immediately. The very first turn you can flip this over if you really want to, and I highly recommend it actually. I think that's a really good idea. In most cases. I'm just going to point out that that can be bad in some situations. Sometimes it's cool to flip this almost immediately to get the extra cards. After it's flipped, you can exhaust this card to draw a card, and you can do that during your main phase pretty much at any time. And you pretty much want to do this every single turn, because if you do it every single turn, then you're drawing 2 cards a turn instead of 1, and you're going to be ahead of your opponent in hand size. Of course, being exhausted all the time means your main character isn't going to be helping you solve problems and stuff. But if you really need DJ Pawn 3 out there helping you solve problems, then at the start of your score phase, if this is with at least 3 of your friends, you can ready this card. So this is anywhere. Like, it can happen at your home, but at your home it's not going to do you much good. It's not like you can just keep tapping it to draw more cards. But if you happen to need it to solve problems and you have it at a problem with at least 3 friends, then you can use its effect every turn without having to worry about it not being readied in order to solve problems. Overall, if you're not going for a really dismissal-heavy deck, this is probably the best pink starter you can go for right now. Our pinks are going to be a little scattered here, but pink does a lot of stuff, so I'm going to try to look at as much of it as possible. Berry Punch is what we're going to start with, All Night Partier. When this card enters play, you can draw a card. When you confront this card's problem, you may exhaust this card to draw a card. So it's 2 for 2 power. And every time you confront its problem, you can exhaust it to draw a card. As long as you're not going into a face-off, then this pretty much gives you advantage for a really long time. And the fact that it's only got 1 pink color requirement makes it a very powerful play, especially if you're playing against a control deck. If you drop Berry Punch early in the game and your opponent has a control deck, then they have to answer this, or your hand is just going to be ridiculous for the rest of the game. We're going to look at a Pinkie Pie, and oddly enough, we only have 1 Pinkie Pie we're going to look at today, 4 color requirement, pay 2, get 2 power, and when it enters play, you can search your deck for a friend, reveal it, put it in your hand, and shuffle your deck. This is pretty much your basic tutor, as they say in most games. You play it, and your hand is replaced with any card that you need at the time, any friend card that you could possibly want. It lets you get a friend that dismisses, if that's what you need. It lets you get friends with big power if that's what you need. It's 2 power, and also you get 1 card that you need at the time. This effect is arguably good right now because we have so much card draw in pink right now, so much really good card draw. So your chances are you're going to draw into a lot of the cards that you need anyway, but this is really great for toolboxy players. There are some players that only want to play with like 1 or 2 of each card in their deck. If you run 3 Pinkie Pie, everybody's PFF, and you run like 1 to 2 of each of your other cards, then you can just tutor into whichever card you happen to need at the time, and it makes running 1 to 2 of some cards viable. Moving Mare is probably my favorite card in pink right now, and a lot of people don't understand why this card is so awesome. So I'm going to explain to you guys why Moving Mare is my favorite card in pink. First off, 1 for 2 power. Always good. 1 for 2 power is awesome. So its effect is pay 1 to put a +1 counter on an opposing friend here. And you're thinking, oh, why do I want to give my opponent's power? That's stupid. But its second effect is you can pay 1 and exhaust this card to dismiss a friend here with at least 4 power. So in short, Moving Mare gets rid of 1 problematic friend every single turn. Every turn. Yeah, its effect is a little expensive, and some people will be quick to point that out, but it depends on how you're playing it. If your opponent has a 3 power friend, then you pay 1 to give it a +1 power, and then you get rid of it with 1 more, and you exhaust this card. It's really good. I also like to think of this as your orange deck is now irrelevant kind of card, because you don't even need to put +1 counters on anything. You could literally just every turn pay 1, exhaust this, and get rid of a friend. Aside from this just coming in and cleaning up friends, it also is a neat little mind game that you play with your opponent, because once it's at a problem, your opponent has to keep in mind that any card they play down could be a target for its effect. So if your opponent happens to have 4 power friends or 3 power friends in their hand, and they want to play them to Moving Mare's problem, they have to figure out a way to get rid of Moving Mare first. Like if your opponent's playing a blue deck or something that doesn't have a lot of removal, then your opponent is going to have a really hard time playing around it. Honestly, I'd say its only downside is its 4 color requirement, which is fair. Okay, come on guys. It is very fair to have this have a 4 color requirement, because if you could drop these things like first, second, third turn, then it wouldn't be a very fair card at all. We're going to look at one more derpy who is also really good. First of all, Eccentric 3. Holy cow, I think that's the most eccentric card that any one friend has. And it's just amazing that you get Eccentric 3 on top of already having 5 power. And when this card enters play, you may dismiss a friend there. So you pay 5, you get 5 power, you dismiss a certain amount of power from your opponent's side of the field, and you force your opponent to have to play more friends there for you to dismiss with other cards. Mega Mare and Moving Mare together just make an amazing kind of control deck that is beautiful, and people need to take more advantage of it, I think. Obviously, 5 is a little pricey, but if you're willing to pay the 5 and build a deck around this and Moving Mare, you've got a pretty nice little budget control deck on your hands. Next, we're going to look at Tom Rolling Rock. You pretty much have to run this card now. There used to be a card back in the day that everybody ran called Pinkie Pie Responsibility Pie, and I'm sure a lot of people remember it. I'm sure a lot of people even still have their copies of it. But this is just a better card altogether. It's better in every conceivable way. First of all, it doesn't have to dismiss a friend at its problem. It can dismiss a friend anywhere it wants to. It can dismiss a friend at home, the other problem, wherever. Which already makes it better than Responsibility Pie. It has pretty much the same ratios as far as action points to actual power, because Pinkie Responsibility Pie was 2 power for 4, and this is 1 power for 3. You're still losing 2 no matter what. It has a chaos effect, so when it's flipped, you can dismiss a friend with 2 or less power involved in a face-off. Because it only has 1 power, it hits random, so if you happen to random it, you can put it at the bottom of your deck and get a new card. Again, the only thing holding it back is the 4 color requirement, but we can play around that. Must have in every pink deck. I'd say it at least 2. You might be able to get away with only paying 1, but I really highly recommend you run 2 in your deck. One thing that newer players are going to wonder about is, once you already have it in play, like, what can you really do with it? And the answer is, going back to what I was saying before, you have to have something in your deck to let you dismiss this card to get another effect. You can't keep playing the game with these on-play effects that don't have much power. If you're really paying 2 to move this 1 power around, then you're in a really bad spot and you need to stop. Just figure out a way to run something in your deck that will let you get rid of this card for another effect. If you can't find anything, then I highly recommend running that Pinkie Pie that lets you dismiss this to get rid of another friend. So you play it, you dismiss a friend, you sacrifice it, you dismiss another friend, you're dismissing 2 friends for 3 action points with no requirements really, and that's pretty awesome. Speaking of which, Brayburn is a pretty nice thing to dismiss your friends for. Pay 2, you get 4 power, and its only thing is you have to retire a friend in order to play it. If you're playing cards like Tom, then this card is absolutely nothing. And it's really good value, 2 for 4 power. That's awesome. So altogether you're paying 5 because Tom costs 3, and you're dismissing a friend and getting 4 power on the board, which is definitely worth it. I'm not looking at it here, but another really good card for this is Penny Lanes, who when you play it, you dismiss a friend and you get its action points back. So if you were to play it after your Tom, then you would pay 3, dismiss a friend, pay 2, put 2 power in play, and then dismiss Tom to get those 3 action points back and not have to pay anything for it. You can go whichever direction you want to. I kind of like Brayburn a little more because Pink doesn't have very much power that it can put on the board, and the one problem that a lot of Pink players have is you have to be able to also solve problems. Like, dismissing your opponent's field and making it so they can't win the game is great, but if you can't win the game either, your opponent is going to eventually outspeed you. Next card I want to look at is DJ Pawn 3 Loose Cannon. The thing with this is some people might be looking at this and, thinking of ways to pair it with Penny Lanes, Brayburn, and get rid of it to just blow up a whole bunch of cards, but it has to be dismissed in order to get its effect. I found a couple of neat ways to use this, one of them being if you play one of the showdown cards and you have your side lose on purpose, then you can do some pretty fun stuff. Like, if you play one of the cards that makes it so that the loser has to dismiss their in-play pony after they do a showdown, then you can lose on purpose, have DJ Pawn 3 go away, and then your opponent's side of the field just blows up and everything sweeps off into the discard pile. Overall, it's a pretty nice reset button, and it's really, really good against the mirror match. So if your opponents are playing a lot of pink decks, this is a nice little way to control pink decks a little bit because your opponent can't get rid of this card without getting rid of their entire field. Gonna look at one more DJ Pawn 3 here. Breakdown, main phase. You can exhaust this card to dismiss an exhausted friend. There used to be a cheese sandwich card that did pretty much this exact same thing, but it was nowhere near as good because you had to exhaust it and put it in your hand, and that made it really slow. But with this, you just exhaust it, you dismiss a friend, and that's it. That's all that happens. And an exhausted friend, sorry. And that's it. That's it. Like, if your opponent has any effects that have them exhaust to use their effects, then you can immediately snipe them. If you're running a deck that exhausts ponies, then you can immediately snipe them with this, like if you're running a pink-orange or something. Overall, this is just a really great anti-meta card right now. If your opponent's not really running anything that has to exhaust to use its effects, like if you don't really see all-team organizers, for example, then this isn't quite as good as a lot of other choices. But if you happen to be running a pink-orange or something to make up for the fact that your opponent might not be running those exhausts to get an effect kind of cards, then this can actually be a really devastating card. For 2 power, it's a really good choice. Sonata Dusk is a pretty interesting card. You can pay 1 to play it for 1 power, in which it has Eccentric 2, which is pretty good for only paying 1 action point. And as an immediate action, you can banish a card from your hand and retire this card to gain control of an opposing friend here until the end of the turn. If you know you're going into a face-off, this can help you win your face-offs, and you can also use it for some of the funniest stuff ever. One of my favorite moves, I'd have to say, is this. Play Sonata Dusk in a deck where you have the Pinkie Pie that lets you get rid of one of your friends to dismiss one of your opponent's friends. So you play Sonata Dusk, you use its effect to take control of one of your opponent's friends, and then you retire the friend that you just took to get rid of one of your other opponent's friends. And it's getting 2 cards out of the way, and it's really fun. It's a really good tech. Highly recommended if you're running a Pokepony deck. The last one we're going to look at is Screwy Barking Mad, and this could be a very fun tech. It's 2 for 1 power because it's kind of an old card, so It's not the best power to action point ratio, but its effect is pretty great. Your opponent needs at least 3 characters to confront this card's problem. This anti-metas out a lot of stuff, like if your opponent is running a truly outrageous deck, and they're powering up rarity and then like moving it to your problem, and then moving it back home and just doing this over and over again for free victory points, you can stop that. And you also have the power to make it so your opponent has to have more friends at a problem to solve it, which is great for you because you need friends to be at problems so you can dismiss them over and over again. Like, it's forcing your opponent to put more targets out for you to dismiss, and that makes it really good. And since you're continuously dismissing friends, and your opponent's field is just going to keep getting smaller and smaller, you can actually get them to a point where they can't even confront problems because they're running out of friends. We're going to be looking at the events now, and we're going to start with an oldie but goodie. Let's get this party started. 1, draw 3 cards. This card is a classic. This card will always be a classic because paying 1 to draw 3 cards is always going to be a good effect. Cutie Pox Outbreak is a kind of difficult to use card, but I do see it getting a little bit of play right now. When you flip it for a face-off, then you can dismiss a friend with printed power 3 or more. And if you just play it normally during a face-off, you can dismiss a friend with printed power 2 or less. So there are not that many problematic cards that only have 2 or less power right now, but I have seen this used to get rid of like things that are at home. All-Team Organizers being an example. Cloud Chasers used to be an example, but I don't really see that anymore. Overall, it's 1 for pretty decent removal. And if you happen to flip it during a face-off, you can get rid of something pretty darn powerful. Catch Me is a great card. Retire one of your friends involved in the face-off to dismiss an opponent's friend involved in the face-off. There's a couple of very creative ways you can use this. One of my favorite ways is if you use this during one of the showdown cards, like the card that lets you have one of your ponies fight against one of your opponent's ponies, and your pony has to be like less power than theirs. What you can do is you can start a face-off doing that, and then play this card to just sacrifice them both off so no one wins. It's just great. Everything about this card is beautiful. You pay 1, you sacrifice off somebody that you don't really need, and you get rid of your opponent's most powerful, most expensive card. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Sacrificing a 25-cent card to get rid of your opponent's $50 to $60 card will never lose its charm. Yoink is another great card for this. Dismiss a friend with power greater than its cost. There's a lot of neat ways you can use this right now. One of my favorites being if you have this in the same deck with Moving Mare, and your opponent is doing something like, let's say, paying 2 for 2 power, then you can pay 1 to give it an extra point, so it's 3 power, and then dismiss it with Yoink during a face-off. It's pretty great. Also, this obviously gets rid of a lot of other problematic things too. There are a few things going around right now that have power greater than their actual cost, and there's a lot of cards that are giving power right now, especially in white and orange. Puppet Show's a really creepy card. I'm sorry, guys. Anyways, so you can pay 1 and choose a problem, and opponents need an extra 2 power to confront that card's problem at the end of the turn. This isn't the greatest card out there, but it's a really nice card if your opponent is doing something really early game-ish, like a rush deck, because if your opponent has enough to solve a problem, then what you can do is at the start of the score phase, you can activate this and make it so that they can't solve the problem anymore. Since it's their score phase and not their main phase, they can't do anything to the field to give themselves enough power to solve the problem, so you can buy yourself an extra turn. You can also do it during your turn if you need to make it so that your opponent is no longer confronting a problem if you want to confront a problem but you're not ready to do a face-off. So we finally hit another good Epiphany card. During the main phase, you can choose 2 of these. Dismiss a friend with 2 or less power, put a friend from your discard pile into your hand, or pay 2 less for the next card you play this turn. Wow, all 3 of these choices are pretty darn good. Dismissing a friend with 2 or less power, that is obviously good because it's removal, and that's what we're looking to do. Put a friend from your discard pile back into your hand, that's good because pink is all about dismissing its own friends. So if we happen to be running something like that, then we can put those friends back in our hand, replay them, re-sacrifice them, and do it all over again. Or pay 2 less for the next card you play this turn. That's pretty awesome because this makes it so that this is almost like it only costed 1, to get one of the other effects, and then you get something else, and it's just really good. Overall, this is one of the better Epiphany cards. Multi-Goof-Off is our showdown. For this one, it's the one where you involve all of your characters and your opponent's characters at a problem, and the winner gets to draw a card for each of their friends involved in the face-off. With all of these showdown cards, you want to play them when you have a very obvious advantage and you're going to win. So this is pretty nice. Not only does it let you draw a card for all of your friends involved in the face-off, but you also get the bonus of it starting a face-off. So your face-off cards that you need, like Yoink or any of your other cards that can only be activated during a face-off, you can use this, start a face-off, and then activate all of your effects. So everything about it's pretty awesome. 3 to draw a bunch of cards and get all your face-off effects off. Rolling Tones is a pretty easy card. Pay 3, dismiss a friend. The thing that makes this good is it's an immediate. So, like, you can do this as soon as your opponent plays a friend, or during the score phase, or during a face-off. Being an immediate makes this card a very powerful, very necessary card right now. I'd say at least one of in every single pink deck. Every single one of them. You have no idea how good immediate removal is, especially when it doesn't have any other kinds of effects. It's just dismiss a friend. That's it. Oh man, so Chaos Capital of the World. This is a very, very interesting card. You can pay 4 to turn each character over. Now, what does that mean exactly? Well, let's go over it really quickly, shall we? So if you're turning the main characters over, then you're turning boosted characters back to their start, and start characters back to their boosted. So if you do this correctly, you can get your start effects over and over again, or if you also want to get rid of your opponent's boosted side, it does that too. And when it turns all the other characters over, what that means is it turns unfrightened characters into frightened characters and vice versa. One thing that's really neat about this is if you're having a lot of trouble with frightened decks, this card is hilarious, because if your opponent frightens your entire field, then you can play this, it unfrightens all of your friends, refrightens all of your opponent's friends, and then also flips their main back to its start side. Not great in every deck, but pretty darn good in some. We started with a classic and we're ending with a classic. Downright dangerous. Pay 2, choose an opponent's friend, it gets -2 power to the end of the turn, and if it has 0 power or less, dismiss it. This card is still pretty awesome. Because even if it doesn't dismiss the friend you're looking to get rid of, it still gives them -2 power. So it's not something that you have to meet the condition it has to have 2 or less power. It's just if it happens to have 2 or less, it dismisses. If it has any more than 2, then it loses 2 power. So pretty awesome. This card is especially good if you're going into a face-off and you want to give your opponent less power, or if you want to make your opponent less powerful so that they cannot confront their problem and go into a face-off with you in the first place. Alrighty guys, we finally hit our resources. The first we're going to look at is Cheese Shoes. It's a resource, it's an accessory. You play it on a friend and that friend has +2 power and eccentric 2. Paying 1 to give +2 power to something and also give eccentric 2 to its problem is pretty darn good. You're getting a lot of bang for your buck here. This is also really good anti-meta against white decks that revolve around friends not having resources on them. Well, surprise, we have our own accessories and they're pretty good. Next we're going to look at Assault Pie. This is one of the many cards I was talking about when I said that if you have effects that need the face-off in order to go off, they can go off if you play a showdown card. So if you play multi-Goof-Off and you happen to have Assault Pie on one of your friends, not only are you drawing those cards for winning the face-off, but for 1 cost, you have a card that lets you dismiss one of your opponent's friends involved in the face-off. This card has so much value on it, it's just irreplaceable right now. I would say that this card is actually very useful, and I would run it at, let's say, 1 or 2 at least in most decks, because face-offs are going to happen. There's no way to avoid it. And this is good anti-meta against white like we talked about before. And even if your opponent isn't running something that requires you to have accessories, getting rid of this card that only costed 1 to get rid of 1 friend involved in a face-off that costs probably a lot more than 1 is really good. Pie Family Rock Farm accelerates the game. You play it to your home, and when this card enters play, you draw a card, and then starting from then on, when your opponent and you draw a card at the beginning of your turn, you draw 2 cards instead of 1. Some people shy away from this card, and I totally understand, but I think this is a pretty neat card, especially for acceleration. If you're running an orange-pink deck, this card is almost a must, because orange controls your opponent's hand so well that really you're the only one receiving any benefit from this, because you can control your opponent's hand, and it doesn't really matter that they're drawing more cards. Party Hat is the card we needed forever, and by golly, we got it. This is such a great card for pink decks right now. You play it on your opponent's best friend, and as soon as you dismiss one of your opponent's friends, that friend goes away too. Everything about this card is just awesome right now. So let's say your opponent is being really careful about one of their friends. They're keeping it at the other problem, it's getting really hard for you to deal with, and there's no way for you to dismiss it, but there's a way for you to dismiss one of their other friends. You play Party Hat on that friend, you dismiss the easy to dismiss friend, and you snipe that one too. It's like a ricochet shot. Plus, adding 1 extra point to have one of your dismissal cards dismiss 2 friends instead of 1, it's great. Like, how can you even complain about that? Chicken Costume is a fairly old card, but it's still pretty good anti-meta. You play it on a friend that needs to exhaust to use its effect, and your opponent cannot use that effect, because if they exhaust it for its effect, then it's dismissed. Again, I know I keep harping on about this, but if you're running an orange-pink deck that involves exhausting your opponent's friends, then this card is great. Also, if you're running against decks that have to exhaust to use their effects, then this card is also great. Cardboard Box is probably the best non-removal card we have in resources as far as pink goes. If you play it on a friend, it cannot contribute its power to face-offs. One of the cool things about this is it completely ignores Stubborn. So even if your opponent's friends have Stubborn, they still can't contribute their power to the face-off, which is cool. The other cool thing about this is if you happen to be running a deck with a lot of troublemakers in it, this can lock down your opponent from being able to beat that troublemaker, because if you keep putting cardboard boxes on their friends, then they can't contribute their problems to... they can't contribute their power towards the face-off because it is a troublemaker face-off. Griffonstone costs 3. You play it on a problem and it has vexing, so if your opponent would normally confront this card's problem, you can retire this and they don't confront it instead, and when this is retired, you can pay 1 to dismiss a friend here. As far as pure removal goes, this card is really weak, because it's pretty much 4 to get rid of a friend when we have plenty of ways to do it for 1 or 2, but at the same time, this is a really good card against rush decks or some control decks, because there are going to be times where your opponent is able to confront a problem that you weren't expecting them to, especially if it's later in the game and you're in danger of losing. And this makes it so that it's impossible for your opponent to get a leg up on you or to outright win a game against you when you weren't expecting them to, and it also gives you the option to dismiss a friend if you so choose. Heck, if you're really desperate, you can play Griffonstone. You can retire it when your opponent's going to confront a problem, and then pay that 1 to get rid of your DJ Pawn 3 and just blow all of their friends up, because they have to have had friends there to solve the problem, so there's going to be targets for her effect no matter what. Party Bomb is a very unique card. At the start of your turn, you can put a party counter on this card, and you can pay any number of action tokens equal to the number of party counters on this card and retire it to dismiss all friends with printed power equal to the current number of party counters on this. So this is quite literally a field clearing card. You play it and you just kind of let it sit for as long as you need it to, and then when you're ready you can just let it explode and get rid of everything. One thing that's kind of neat about this is if your opponent is playing like Owls, for example, then, or Breezes have 0 power too, you can play this and immediately get rid of it to just get rid of all of your opponent's 0 power friends. This is also great, again, for orange decks, because if you're running a lot of friends with 4 or more power, then you can let this get up to 3 power and pretty much get rid of everything in the game that isn't the 4 power orange friends. This is also a really good reset button against yellow decks, because yellow decks, first of all, don't have much printed power. It doesn't matter how much they get from Critter Cuisine or any other cards they're playing. it just gets rid of them based on their printed power. So if you let's get up to like 3 power, even if you do have to sacrifice a lot of your field, your opponent's probably going to have a lot more friends than you in play, so they're actually losing more than you in the long run, no matter what. Acrobatics Act is a very good early game card. It's a little useless later in the game, but if you happen to get this within the first 2 to 3 turns of the game, it's pretty awesome. You play it to your home, and at the end of each of your turns, you draw an extra card, and when your opponent confronts a problem, you retire this card. So as long as you can keep your opponent from confronting problems, this is another card draw that you get every turn. Pink does card draw so well, and this is no exception to the rule. The last card we're going to talk about today is Assault Cake, another classic. You can pay 2 to play it to your home, and during a face-off, you can put it on top of your deck so that you are guaranteed to be able to flip over 6 power during a face-off. This card is not quite as powerful as it used to be, mainly because there are cards that let you control the top card of your opponent's deck now. But for the most part, if you can guarantee yourself 6 power during a face-off, then this is really awesome. I'd still say that Assault Cake is a necessary card in most people's decks, especially since it only costs 2. Alright guys, that's it for the cards we're going to look at today. Overall, I think pink has pretty much solidified its spot as probably the most fun color to play. Like, if you're trying to get somebody into the game, I highly recommend getting them into pink, because pink just feels really good to play, and there are so many different options that you can run. Seriously, like, no 2 competitive pink decks have to look the same. You can just do so much variety that you don't really have access to in a lot of other colors. I know I said this before, but the absolute joy of getting rid of a 25-cent card to get rid of when your opponent's like $50, $60 cards is still heartwarming and still a joy to this day. It's surprisingly competitive too. I would argue that it's one of the most powerful colors. The only problem with it is it still has its problem of not being able to solve problems very well. You have to run the really low requirement problems in order to play pink, because if you don't, you are probably going to get outsped later in the game, and even though you're delaying your opponent by getting rid of all of their cards, eventually they'll draw new cards and they will come back and crush you. Because even though pink is great at getting rid of problems and getting rid of characters, it just does not solve those problems itself fast enough. With that being said, another cool thing about this is it's probably the best color for budget decks. So if you don't have very much money and you're looking to get really competitive into the game, I highly recommend looking into pink. There's a lot of great stuff here, and a lot of the really good stuff even comes in starter decks. As far as pairing goes, I'd say that pink-orange is the best for competitive play, like really high-level stuff, because orange is really good at solving problems, and a lot of the cards that let you exhaust cards become absolutely deadly when you pair them with pink. Although I feel like pink can pretty much go with anything. It's really a good color to splash into any of your other decks. I already said pink-orange. I think pink-blue is also really competitive, and I'd say pink-white are probably the top 3. Pink-orange, pink-blue, and pink-white. It does go with the other colors, but probably just not as well as it does with those 3 right now, because it needs something very oomphy, very powerful to back it up if you really want to get in there and start solving problems while pink is controlling everything. So did I leave out any cards you wanted to see? Leave me your thoughts on the set in the comments section below, along with suggestions on what you'd like to see me do next. If you enjoyed this video, please leave it a like. Those things really do help me out. And finally, subscribe to stay up to date on the latest Kudo news. Just one color left, MLP fans, and as we all know, orange is quite the doozy. Hope you're as excited as I am.